All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Garret Jones, and I am here with the Simply Winning podcast, episode number 1, my first guest, and one of my favorite people, Christine Miles. So, author, listening guide. Tell us a little bit about your work previous to writing the book in 2021. What is it costing you not to listen?
Well, yeah, first of all, let me say that this is a privilege to be guest number 1. Let me just say that and say congratulations to you. I love what the concept, and I'm sure your listeners are going to love it as well. And you and I met in one of the favorite ways I get to meet somebody, which is you read my book and reached out to me, which I appreciated. And then our conversation, which I'd like to talk about, had a profound impact on me. So again, just to take your people back. So about me, well, this is my story. So I'll just start there. I grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania. If anybody's ever been to Hershey Park, 10 minutes from Hershey Park, I did work there for a little time. I may have served somebody popcorn and cotton candy in my youth, but it was pretty idyllic on the surface. I played a lot of sports, chased a ball, all the good things outside play. Was the 70s, so we weren't even supervised at that time. But like I said, on the surface, a lot of people's story is not dissimilar, that while there were so many wonderful things, there was also pain and difficulties, and that largely was stemming from my mother, who had suffered depression and anxiety, as well as some other mental health and illness problems, all stemming from an early childhood loss. She lost her mother when she was just an infant. Her mother wasn't supposed to have kids. She had an illness when she was a child, and her heart was weak. And the doctor said, don't have children, and my grandmother didn't listen to that advice. And had my mother. They said you won't survive childbirth, and within 3 months of giving birth to my mom, she did in fact die. So my mother lived with the burden of believing she was the cause of her mother's death and being motherless her entire life. So I was the anointed girl in the family. I have an older brother, but the anointed girl that was here to solve that problem, understand and see the pain that most people didn't understand and see. And listen, the therapist and I are working out the burden side of that. I will be disingenuous if I didn't say that was a lot of burden. And it also gave me my greatest gift, which was an ability to shine a light and understand and see what wasn't said. And that became a superpower from a pretty early age, as early as high school.
So do you remember this ability kind of recognized for you in high school?
I can even go back way earlier, like very early childhood, where I was around adults and I was understanding things and other kids, but I started to show up in success in high school. That's when I started to see that I had something that was standing out and making me better than I was naturally. Yeah. I don't know that I was born with it. Both my mother's experience and what I witnessed and how I saw her not be listened to in many ways. People would try to talk her out of her pain, and I saw the costs of that. I also saw what other people weren't seeing and hearing, and then my parents both were very good listeners.
Can you remember taking it from a liability where this felt like a burden, kind of holding people up, to all of a sudden realizing, like you talk about it today, and it's very much an asset for you?
Yeah.
It has created a lot of opportunities in your life, right? And I would assume that you no longer look at it as a burden or a trauma or something that you need to go back and rework and fix. Is that fair to say?
Well, the trauma wasn't the listening part. The trauma was the responsibility part. As a child, and I didn't know any different as a child, so that was my experience. So it wasn't trauma when I was a child. As an adult, I'm very, very aware that was a heavy responsibility for a little girl, to have to understand her mother's pain and hold that for her. The gift part of it is that, like many people, what is a burden, and often in our childhood, can really become our greatest asset in terms of our adulthood. So that's the difference. It was the responsibility. The gift was what I gained from that responsibility, which was this skill that most people aren't shown how to do. And so I was shown it, and I learned it very young, and I was expected to do it. And I paid attention differently. And that helped me from the sports field to overcoming academic challenges. I've overachieved in anything I've done because I've had this fundamental skill.
Okay, I want to jump into athletics, but first I want to share with you, I heard this definition of trauma, and I want to hear what you think about it. And it was, trauma is not what happened to me. It's how I stored that experience in the absence of an empathetic witness.
Wow. Yeah. There's real, that's a powerful statement because, and it ties very nicely to what I believe. And look, nobody goes into, my background is in psychology. So I have a master's in psychology. As you mentioned, I was a former therapist. My first career, I was 22 years old knocking on people's doors. I was a home-based family therapist. Like, that's another whole story. Like, again, well beyond what my years really I deserved, but I had this other skill. And I do believe that the greatest gift you can give someone is to see and understand them. And that's that empathetic person. So, yeah, I think obviously there's my parents did so many things right, but the trauma was that was a lot to expect, and the witnessing and the empathetic witnessing of that probably wasn't there, and that is part of the experience because it heals to be seen. This is a mission for me, not to globalize listening education so that it's everybody has it, because right now only 2% of the world, only 2% of people get any formal listening training. As I mentioned, I was a trained therapist by really high-level clinicians at a renowned institution at the time, and I have a master's from an Ivy League school, which was a kind of a miracle that I got in itself, but I was never formally trained to listen either.
Right. That's amazing, right? You got that level of education and
Yeah.
you were still just a regurgitator of information and a memorizer, if I simplify it.
Well, it wasn't so much that. It was more that you were just expected to know how to do it as a therapist. It wasn't formally trained. And that's not true across all genres of being educated, but I've talked to other PhDs and other therapists social workers who have also not had formal listening training, even though that's their degree. So it depends. And so what the point to that is that we're told to listen and not necessarily taught how to listen. And that goes for all of us. One could argue, I mean, look, you're starting a podcast, and lots of people are now in this, but really, have you ever been formally trained to listen yourself?
My listening, it became very evident that it was very important when I saw that people needed to trust me, and the fastest path to trust was to ask them quality questions about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so and you go back to this trust triangle, right? And go like, okay, for life, I want trust. I want people to trust me, but trust is very hard to obtain, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a thought that it's authenticity, it's logic, and it's empathy, right? But for every individual, it's not a 33%, 0.333. I've been consuming books at this rapid pace for the last 5 years, and I love the information, and I started this journey like 9 years ago in recovery, where I got the 12 steps and I got to apply these principles in my life, and my life started changing. And I never thought I was a good student, and all of a sudden, like, my eyes opened to this way of being a learner. And I hope I never lose it. I think it's the funnest thing I get to do is consume new information and talk about it. I absolutely love it. But so I listened to your book twice. Okay. And my purpose was we'll talk about the 6 questions, and they're an amazing framework for being a good father, being a good husband, and being a good business person. Like, they're really good, right? And I don't think I've told probably 50 people about these 5 questions, and nobody's ever heard of it, right? Back to the point of 2% of the population is.
Yeah.
But when I messaged you and you took the time and we had that conversation a couple of years ago, it was like the first time in my life I'd ever been excited about, like, you're just a different sort of person than, like, Michael Jordan was my hero growing up, right? Like to be as excited as I was to talk to a first time author and about what we were talking about. And like, it really was like a turning point for me of like, this is my path and this is what gets me fired up. And so the fact that you took the time and the fact that I had the courage to reach out to you and go like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I just need to follow my cues.
I just think that's what we're supposed to do for each other, for starters. And it's such an easy lift. And like I said, from our conversation, I gained as much as if not more than maybe you did. But that's what connection can do, and really understanding one another. And it's so important what you're saying about trust, because I think we are taught that the way we earn something is to say the right things. And this is where I get a little bit on my soapbox, that I think we have it so profoundly backwards. It's not what we say, it's what we understand. But we need to be shown how to do that, because the reason people don't know how to do it is because they haven't been shown necessarily or taught. And listening has been made really, really complicated. So I was a field hockey player as an athlete. Now, if you live on the West or East Coast, you know field hockey, but field hockey is not everywhere. So and the first thing anybody does when they go to a field hockey game is, what are the rules? Because it's very confusing, because you can only use one side of the stick, and the ball's not allowed to touch the body. So it's so counterintuitive to most sports people, even on side people who are used to watching a lot of sports. It's hard for them to pick up the rules. And maybe this is the first time I've really said this out loud, but maybe those two things aren't that different. That listening and field hockey seem very hard at first blush because it seems so complicated.
I think that's a perfect analogy. I think that's a perfect, yeah. My mom coached field hockey in high school, and I have stories of girls I went to high school with that my mom almost took their head off with a field hockey ball when they weren't listening. She whacked it at them, right? I'm sure you've experienced that a time or two, because you played in college too, correct?
I played in high school and college, and then I was fortunate enough to play. I made it to the U.S. team trials on 2 occasions, so I made it to the top 60. There is a big difference between 60 and 16, but I'm very proud of that. And part of why I'm proud of that, obviously, is because I really didn't have the athletic prowess to be there. I really wasn't a good enough athlete to have accomplished by just nature. Yes, is what I mean, by nature. By nurture, I was far above many, many athletes because I was willing to practice, loved practice, and I fell in love with the game, so I did what it took. And I had these other abilities, which was to read the game and to assess things, which really gets back to that listening.
Quick processing. I want to talk, so I've had a revelation lately with my own athletic youth, and it was that I did this for them. I wanted them to be proud of me. Both of my parents are coach. They're both of my coaches and teachers. And they weren't like what you would think, where they pushed me. I pushed me. And I pushed me to a level like the one that you're describing, where, I believe if you look at professional athletes who have mastered a very basic, simple skill, there's a little OCD in there somewhere, right? If we want to get clinical about it.
Yeah.
Right. For sure, right? You have to practice something very simple. And I remember hearing a goaltender in the NHL who was also an addict, and how he would practice 700 to 800 reps when he was young at the rink before he would allow himself to go home. And he believed very much that every professional athlete, almost all of them, some form of OCD. But
that's
enough
interesting.
about.
I haven't thought of that, but that makes that tracks for me.
It's a basic skill, right?
You gotta like to practice, and you gotta like that repetition.
So for you, have you identified what sports provided in your life and what you were seeking by getting, you said it yourself, your genetic ability was subpar to the level that you were competing at. And so you had to develop these real skills. Do you know what possessed you to do that? And what were you so attractive to about field hockey and about competing?
Well, I was a kid that didn't like to sit. I was a kid that liked to play outside, skateboarding, biking, basketball, tetherball. We played kickball. I was in a neighborhood where the ball was everywhere. Again, we were I was in rural, Hershey, Pennsylvania. We made our own play. So I loved it from the time I was a kid. I started playing softball in first grade. What field hockey did was I followed my best friend into the sport from growing up, who I spent every moment with. And in 7th grade, she went out for field hockey, and I didn't, and I missed her. So I, in 8th grade, went out, and what happened was I met the coach, who became a very special figure in my life, because she was a woman that was inspirational. She was a U.S. field hockey player. They retired her jersey ultimately at the college that I went to for undergrad. But she made me love learning the sport. She was positive. It was all the things. And she knew the game inside and out, so we learned it well. So I started to excel in this environment because she just brought teams together and was just so special. So and then I love chasing the ball to this day. love chasing a ball.
Are you
Love
playing
it.
pickleball now? What are we playing now?
Well, so part of my story, as you know from reading the book, is that I was injured in an accident, an auto accident when I was 28. So at 28, I'm playing U.S. level field hockey. I have chronic pain for 3 years after this accident, and at 31, I go to yet another doctor's appointment after a shoulder and arm surgery. I was still playing competitive hockey because I was very stubborn, and I couldn't pull up my shorts. So my life changed on a dime, and I knew it would never be the same. So I had 3 major cervical spinal surgeries between the ages of 31 and 37, and then I finally got a hold of the major part of the problem, and then it took another 7 years to get to a point, and then another blah blah blah. So I worked my way up to golf in my 40s, and in my mid 50s I finally found it to tennis. So I haven't gone to pickleball yet because I am like a kid in a candy store. In my mind, I'm in my 30s playing tennis. I don't have what it felt like to move to through that. But I will love pickleball when the time has come.
You jogged my memory. I remember in your book you shared something about golf lessons.
Yeah.
And about something profound. And from what I recall, it is very in line with the title of this podcast, which is Simply Winning.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to share that.
Well, my dad was a golfer, and he was quite a good golfer. And my dad loved practice, too. So I emulated him, by the way, because he was the guy hitting golf balls to the can, and then he picked up tennis when I was younger. It became quite good. So he was a practice guy. Golf was never active enough for me. But once I couldn't do anything else, and I'm like, well, I'm just going to at least try this golf thing because I can move my lower body. I had a cervical fusion. Everybody's like, well, you're an athlete and you play field hockey, so you'll just be a natural golfer. Well, there's nothing natural about golf. It's the most unnatural sport, and it's the only sport, I believe, this is my opinion, that you can play and get worse at.
Yeah, 100%.
You go shoot a basketball, you're going to get better even if you throw it wrong. You're just by virtue. You swing the golf club wrong, and you're not getting anywhere but worse.
You know what's crazy that you said that? I've never heard that before. But my grandfather introduced me to golf when I'm like 4th or 3rd grade, put clubs in my hand. And I can look back to like 6th through 8th grade. And that was like the best I ever was at golf. And I still continue to play like once a month. And when I hit it, I can hit the ball damn near like a professional, right? Like I can hit a pitching wedge 160 yards with the draw. It's beautiful. And then all this, but I can't score, you know, I shoot over 100. Doesn't matter what course I'm playing. It doesn't.
It's because, well, that's the complexity of golf, right? Well, and swinging the club the same way every time, and it's so. What happened was so despite everybody thinking this should be just something you naturally do, I could make contact with the ball, but I couldn't do anything. So I went to get golf lessons, and I saw a golf pro that did what a lot of golf pros do, which is tell me 45 things that I should do, that none of which I understand. It made no sense to me. And as an athlete, you want to be able to, and I taught myself how to be a softball pitcher. I was a softball pitcher in college. I was a fast pitcher because they didn't have a coach. So anyway, my dad said, I want you to see my golf pro. Now, we lived an hour and a half from each other, so it wasn't convenient. But what he did was he made it simple. And what he said is, there's only 5 things you need to know. And I was like, tell me more. He said, you gotta know how to set up. You gotta know the grip. You gotta know how to set up. You gotta know what takes the golf swing back and what brings the golf swing down. And I think there was a 5th thing. I don't even remember what it was. But I still have a golf notebook. And when I look at it, it's like, there's nothing in it that's profound. It's like just these simple things. So I've been on the golf course where I'm like, look, I'm not a golf pro. Do as I say, not as I do. But I'll tell you the 5 things the pro did me, and I've set people up, and they're like hitting the ball like they've never hit it before. And I don't have anything. I can't tell them how to do anything fancy, but I can tell them how to set up so the club does the work because it's that simple.
Right. Yeah.
And I was playing a lot of golf back then because that's all I could do. But I went from like scoring in the hundreds to in the 80s. Like, this is where my game went because he helped me learn how to self-correct.
Mm-hmm. And a little self-awareness goes a real long way.
Just to digress, when I wrote the book, and what I realized is that all the things that I was doing, I would go out and do workshops where I would go out and talk, do a keynote, and people thought I was doing something magical with how I was listening. And I had this experience where I was out doing something, and I hadn't been out of the house for, it was right around COVID, and I hadn't been out of the house for a while, and the first CEO, the partner of the company, comes up and goes, "That was amazing. You were hilarious. We were going to get a stand-up speaking thing," because I was on, right? And my ego was like patting myself on the back. And then the second partner comes up and says, "That was amazing." And I checked myself and I said, "What was amazing?" And he said, "You did everything that you showed us how to do from the moment you started. You modeled." But he said, "I don't think most people notice that. I just paid." And I said, "You're right. They didn't. They think it's a magic trick." And I realized I had to put language and tools around this so that people could see that the rabbit was in the hat the whole time. It wasn't any mystery. I had to demystify it and make it so concrete, like that golf pro did for me. And that's what changed the game. That's when I went, I'm going to create these tools. And that's where the first five tools came in, relating it to the golf analogy, which is you really only need 5 tools to listen to understand. 5 things. And that'll get you the whole way. There's more you can learn, and there's actually 12 tools on the path, but you only need 5 to get through any conversation really safely, and for the other person to feel seen, heard, and understood.
And maybe the first thing that you actually need, and I don't know if this is even one of them, is you have to want to do it.
Well, that is the adage. I mean, people will say to me, "You know who could really use your help?" And I go, "Yeah, that person probably doesn't want to work with me or us because they may not think they have a problem." But if it's like the joke in psychology is this: how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
1. It has to want to be changed.
They have to be willing to change it.
You were talking, and I have a therapist, and I thought of what you just shared before you shared it. That's why I was so quick to interrupt and grab your punchline.
It's all right. You got the punchline. But that's true for most things. Like anything has to start with a willingness. But here's what I think why it's hard to be willing sometimes is because change is hard, not even the light bulb change. And when something feels really hard, it's hard to want to change. And so, like I said, listening has been made incredibly complicated, and the world doesn't support us to do it well. Time and pressures, distractions. We fail so miserably. Who wants to do something they're constantly failing at, you know?
Well, I have so much stuff I want to talk about, but I know we only have about like 10 to 12-ish minutes left. But you talk about dating, and you talk about like being such a phenomenal listener. Like these men are just like, "God, you are the best." Like, can we hurry this up? Like you're making me feel amazing. And
right.
it's really putting you in tough situations, right? Because you're like,
well,
do you really?
I overestimated that what they liked for sure. And I don't try this on an airplane, by the way. Like I say, if you listen well, people will talk. So you want to make sure that you want to listen because it's powerful. So what I had to do is I had to stop. I had to learn. I had to talk about myself more because otherwise they didn't know me. They were just seeing a reflection of themselves, which is a wonderful experience.
You talked about like being ready to listen and right, being careful to not do it on an airplane, right? If you're not ready to go there.
Yeah.
And it makes me, I want your opinion of this. So when I'm in a group setting, I really want to have like a deep, inspiring conversation. And the majority of people don't want to have those conversations, certainly not at a New Year's Eve party with 30 people and 50 kids.
Yeah.
And I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, how come nobody's talking about their goals? Like, what the hell are we doing here? 2026 is starting tomorrow. I'm like freaking out. Like, and people want to talk about like the football game or like what the kids are doing next semester. And I'm like, wait a second. I wish I could turn this part of me off and just go like, hey, I'm just going to go surface level for like the next 3 hours because I feel like I really make people uncomfortable. Like, cause they're like, I don't want to go there. And then Mel Robbins says something about like, people can only show up for others in the depth in which they've looked inside themselves. Yeah. Something to that effect.
That's beautifully said too.
And I'm like, it's so true, right? How many times I've tried to go deep with a lot of people and you're like, it's like crickets, right? You're like, they're just not capable of doing it.
Or they haven't practiced it. Like, I get you as far as like you wish you could turn some of that off, because it's hard to find that, because it's a really scary experience when you haven't been taught how to talk about your feelings, because we're not all socialized to do that, so it's so unfamiliar. But once you learn how to do that, it's intoxicating, not to, because you unearth something on a whole nother level that is hard, that is easy to replicate in conversations, but it is hard, it's harder to find. I was part of a speakers group about a year ago. I went for performance training. I've been speaking for 35 years, but I believe in up-leveling, and I thought, you'd love this group, because the depth of conversation and thinking, because once you're able to go there, it's really hard to want to not go there. But I think people just haven't been taught how.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a health retreat in St. George, Utah, with all these wonderful practitioners, and there were 20 of us participants from around the country, and we did all this stuff, right, from hypnotherapy to horse therapy to sweat lodge to meditations and sound baths, and I mean, it was amazing. And so all of us are just opened up and sharing and talking, and we all got, the key is vulnerability, right? Nobody teaches a human being how to be vulnerable. But the second I learned that that was not something I needed to be embarrassed about as a man, my relationship started changing, right? And I no longer had to be afraid of what I was saying and how I was showing up. And it was like a light bulb just went off. And then vulnerability is the key, right? But we don't talk, vulnerability is weakness in our culture still, for a lot of
I think,
people.
well, particularly for men. And then I see this with women who are in the corporate world, that it's hard because they had to live this world where it's not okay, and there's a lot of fear around it. And if I share now, I think we're making a lot of strides. I think Brene Brown made a huge dent in this when she talked about vulnerability in her TED Talk. And even the Harvard Business Review did a study that talked about what made someone stand out in terms of their gravitas, their executive presence, in 2012 versus, I think it was 21. Okay, so like 10-year difference. And what used to be is like command the room, what you wear, right? And your executive presence. It was all that output stuff.
It was a
Now
visual.
and now it's how you, and those things still somewhat matter, but it's an and how you listen and how you show who you are, which is the vulnerability thing, right? Not what you wear, who you are, and then and how you receive rather than just put out. So we're making progress, but this is, one of the things that we teach with the listening path is that we have to help name people's emotions, because they may not have ever been given the language to name them themselves. And that's part of how we build trust and build connection, because if you just, one of the things you can say is simply ask, how does that make you feel? Or you could say, it sounds like you feel disheartened when
Yes, I
you're
do.
not
You
able to
hit that
connect
right
with
on.
people.
And then you follow it up by saying, let silence do the heavy lifting. Let silence do the heavy lifting, right? Let these people talk. So Michael Singer, you familiar with him? Untethered Soul and the Surrender Experiment. And the way he describes what we're talking about with emotions is that basically the mind is a safe place for me to rationalize all these experiences and all this input that I'm getting through these eyes that I've got my whole life. And the mind is going to figure it out and kind of keep me safe. But every once in a while, it gets out of the mind and it drops down to the heart. And his assertion is that we don't understand our emotions and we don't want anything to do with them. And it's very easy to run away from it, right? Suppress it, right? So he talks about, if you're not dealing with rejection and like keeping things away, deflecting things and clinging to things, your spiritual life is not growing. You're not working on this, on your spirit and on your psyche, right? And being able to like change the perspective on an emotion and say, you know what? Here is a list of emotions that you will feel. They're good, bad, and indifferent. And what if we can have a conversation where these are just meant to give you further information and you don't have to be afraid of them? And I hope that someday this is something that we're able to go into schools and teach kids at a very early age. We don't have to change the way we're feeling. And my fear is going forward, it is so easy with these monsters we all carry around in our pocket and how good the algorithm is getting by feeding us exactly what we want to see.
Yeah.
I will stop. I will no longer have to deal with my emotions because I have such an instant dopamine hit when I pick
Yeah.
that phone up. I don't, the second I start to feel, and when I look back to my own drinking and using behavior, I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't raised in an environment where people were talking about their
Yeah.
emotions. Wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't what our parents did. It just
Well,
wasn't
my
a thing.
parents actually did. That doesn't mean they always, that doesn't mean I didn't come from crazy and that it still didn't screw me up, by the way. I don't want to pretend that. But that's part of why I've always been undaunted about talking about emotions. But this saved your life. Learning how to do this saved your life, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, 100% in my perspective, I'm not here today without a number of things happening in my life.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and you know, Joe, I'm more optimistic that that we're going to get to a point where the phones and this distraction isn't going to feed us as it is today. Because I think I just did an article yesterday on banning cell phones in schools, and kids are, when you take it away, overindulgence is one of the greatest forms of child abuse. And having this constant indulgence with the phones in their rooms isn't healthy for them. We wouldn't feed them candy all day. We wouldn't feed them alcohol all day. We wouldn't feed them cigarettes all day. So, but we just don't know. The ship sails so fast, and it's just so profound what this little. I mean, I remember when I first got my iPhone, was it like 2006? My ex-husband, now ex-husband, my husband at the time was a software engineer, and something wasn't working with the phone. He said, "Turn it off." I go, "Wait, turn it off." He goes, "It's actually a computer. It's not a phone." And I was like, "Okay, let me unplug it. Let me turn it off and reset it." So we're not holding a phone. We're holding the world at our fingertips.
Yes.
And but I hope that the connection, this is what's going to save us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, back to like getting information and being able to change your own life. It's never been stronger than it is today.
Yeah.
But I would love for the conversation in my house with my two daughters who are 8 and 10 has shifted to what are we doing with the information
Yeah.
and what is the action or habit that we can take, because unless we're doing that, we're almost just distracting ourselves a little bit. I look at how I used information.
It's a
The way I
pacifier.
used the way I used information before, to be quite honest, and it's a little embarrassing, is it was a superiority play. Because if I was smarter than you, and if I had some information you didn't have, I got to feel better than you. And it was the same thing that I felt with athletics. Athletics for me was a safe place because I could kick your ass on a basketball court or a soccer field. And as long as I could do that, you couldn't hurt me, right? Like you were not going to pick on me because I was good at that thing that people respected. And I think a lot of my drive was to be safe, which is crazy,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's like, oh, I did this for safety. But I think it's just a
Makes
natural
sense.
human instinct.
Yeah. Well, this is where I'll side note here, but just as a tip for your listeners, one of the things that I studied in my grad work was group process and understanding yourself in the context of groups. And there's a longer story there. But as a competitive person, because sports is about competition, and competition is very healthy. One of my leading authorities in group process taught me that the root word of competition is competence. Only place competition doesn't work is in relationships. We're playing Monopoly and you're over 8, fair game. We're playing a game, but not at the cost. But if we're having a conversation and we're in competition, we're in a different paradigm, and that's not good.
My competition level was dangerous for me, not only with my relationships with others, but the most important one was the relationship with myself.
Sure, because it became the most important thing, right? Winning.
Yep. And it's super. I have a spiritual advisor today, and he always says to me, I am no longer in competition with you or myself. And he also references, he says, I no longer have to defend my position.
Yeah.
He just says
that's
that
the
constantly.
vulnerability thing, right?
And he
Because
just,
it's a protective layer to say, right?
Out here, no thank you. I don't want to tell you what's going on in there. I don't even know. I don't want to look.
Well, part of the fear with people asking and listening to understand is the need to want to fix what they're hearing because it's so uncomfortable because people feel helpless if I can't make it better for the other person. And But the real gift is, whether I'm talking business, by the way, as well as personal, this is
Right.
both sides of the coin, is I think is the understanding alone is what helps heal and helps make things better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going back to, I think, that what I said earlier about trauma and an empathetic witness.
Empathetic
And
witness.
how many, I mean, survey people, how many people would answer that question? Yes. I had an empathetic witness in my life when I was struggling with whatever they were struggling with. I think it's very few. I want to finish with something about you just touched on it. But how could the listener take some of these tools that you teach so brilliantly and use them with their partner in their most important relationships? And I've heard a number of different suggestions, but I'd like to know, like, where would you start with a couple and go, like, this would be an awesome game that you guys should schedule time for and really sit down and connect?
Yeah. Well, so I don't think relationships fall apart, on their own. I think they fall apart because this fundamentally gets broken down pretty in relationships. We stop listening to each other. The more we know someone, the less curious we become. I often joke, like, I live near Philadelphia, in the suburbs of Philly. I don't go to the Liberty Bell. Like, I've seen the crack, I know the story. Like, it's not as interesting because I've seen it before. Think about when we first start dating someone or we're with someone, the curiosity is over the top, and that's part of why we're so tuned in, and then life happens and it gets hard. So it's really about making the commitment to take the time, and then it's about listening to understand instead of to solve. And so that's the key, is I'm not going to or argue or debate, or it's just to understand. The goal of listening for goal-oriented people is to understand. And the tools that I talk about in the book on the listening are those tools that people can use to understand. It's all based on the metaphor of, you wouldn't go hiking in the woods without tools or supplies in your backpack. That would be crazy. If I dropped you in the woods for a few hours, you probably want some water at least, right? Probably need a map, you need some supplies, right? Same is true in conversations. We're told to perform at listening instead of actually given the tools how to do it.
So one simple thing, we're going to put a bow on it right here. One simple thing you would suggest that a couple could do every week to strengthen their listening skills.
I'm going to give them two questions that, whatever the conversation you're having, it doesn't even have to be formal. In every conversation that you have with your partner, say these two things: tell me more, and how does that make you feel?
Just to repeat, tell me more, and how does that make you feel?
Yeah. If you add those two questions to your conversations, you will change the way you have conversations.
Absolutely. Christine, thank you so much for your time. We're going to have all the ways that people can follow you and check out your merch. I didn't even mention this awesome shirt.
Yeah.
Listening Matters. You sent this to me a couple of years ago, and you've got a whole store of merch now. I literally couldn't have thought of a better hour to do this for the first interview I get to do. I respect and I appreciate you so much. So thank you for your time. And everybody, check out the book. What is it costing you not to listen? It will change your life if you use those habits. And if you change, the world will change. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Garret.